Hello, I am an engineer at Cloud4U, an enterprise cloud provider. Welcome to our training course. And today, we're going to talk about the settings of the virtual machine and managing it, doing things like power on and off and so on. In order to have something to work with, I've already created a virtual machine. I deployed it from a template. Cloud4U has ready-made templates for most popular systems, which is a great time saver for deployment. But it doesn't stop you from installing the guest operating system manually. So here we have a VM deployed. In this case, it is Windows Server 2019. You will want to activate it right away, but before you do that, let's go into settings. Here we have two links. One of them is Actions, and we'll talk about them later. Let's go to Details. The first thing we see is the Settings section, the general section where we first see a few descriptive fields. Virtual data center of your VM is in VMware Tools version and the virtual equipment version. There is no way you can change all this, it is just for your information. Name is the name of the virtual machine. The virtual computer name is the name of the guest operating system, i.e., if you go into the Windows Server properties, you will see this value. Of course, you can make the amendments for this, and we'll describe how to do it later on. Here we have a field where you can enter a description. For example, I put the name of the company. The thing is, when you have a few virtual machines, you remember what each one is for. If you get a lot of VMs of the same type, it can all be very useful. Next, we have a family of operating systems. In this case, it is Microsoft Windows. And here is another drop-down list. Unfortunately, we cannot display its full view when it is expanded. But take my word for it, there are a lot of operating systems. Of course, you don't need to put something that is not true. Moving on the next, enter BIOS setup. It is important to set and save the settings. If I don't save the settings, the next time I start the virtual machine, I will go into the BIOS. Why this is necessary. For example, you need to boot from an ISO image without installing the operating system, but to run some kind of recovery or backup. And you need to select the device which will start the boot. If you do not enter the BIOS, you certainly cannot do this, i.e. you boot from the hard disk drive in the VM. Here we have boot delay. This is a timeout, a delay after which the boot process will start. You may need it for this. We have everything running fast enough and you may not have time to press the button, if the loader requires it, which is very often the case, for example, on the boot disks in Microsoft Windows, i.e. if you do not have time to press any button in 5 seconds, the loading process would continue from the hard disk drive in VM. So here we set, for example, 5 seconds, which is enough to switch to the console, wait for this prompt, press the key and everything will be fine. Next, storage policy. This is where you select the storage policy, that is the policy of the hard disk drives in the virtual machine. Those disks for which you don't make any specifications, and you can choose a direct storage policy. In this case, they will be on disks with a MAT policy. If you choose something else, as in this case, you will switch to SSD. If you apply the setting, then we have all disks that are not specified will move to SSD. I will not see it now, otherwise the application process will take a long time. Regardless what you can choose here, you can only choose those policies that are connected to your organization, i.e. you cannot choose the fastest drives accidentally. It is impossible. In this list will be presented only those policies that are connected to you and listed in the contract. But independently, if you have enough space on the partition, there is a machine you can migrate there. Okay, the next section, hardware. Here we choose the actual hardware of the virtual machine. Let's go one by one. CPU here, choose the number of CPUs. Here you can choose the number of cores per socket. It will be recalculated automatically. Pay attention to the checkbox. It allows you to add resources to the VM without shutting it down or rebooting. For example, if you have a server and you realize that there is not enough CPU capacity, but you still have enough CPU limit, you can simply add the required number here. Here there are two processors, now three. Press save and you have additional CPUs in the guest system without rebooting the virtual machine. To make this work, first of all, these checkboxes both on CPU and memory must be set, saved, and applied before the virtual machine was started. Otherwise, you have to power it off in order to put these checkboxes. And the operating system must be compatible with the virtualization system. In this case, it's VMware, and must be installed the current version of VMware tools, or Windows operating systems, meaning Windows Server 2016 or 2019. You can be absolutely sure that there are no problems with this. Another checkbox we would like to consider allows you to provide VM with a hardware processor. This action is only needed if you want to deploy a hypervisor inside the VM for some particular purpose. But mostly, you don't need it. Here, as you see, CD, DVD drive, and floppy drive are displayed. Both are marked as disabled. And this is correct because if you have not yet connected anything to VM, and if you then have a disk image connected here, it will be displayed as enabled. Let's go ahead. Hard disk drives, but there is only one for now. What we see here is the disk number, the size in megabytes. So when we set the size, remember a few things. First, remember computers count in a binary system. So in fact, 1 megabyte is 1024 kilobytes, and so on in degrees. For experts, it is obvious, but remember, it is useful at least because sometimes from such small things you face with a lack of space. And the second thing you should remember, here you can change the size of the disk, i.e. now is 40 megabytes, which is certainly not enough to fully work with a large number of users. So you need to increase the size of the disk space or add more disks. You can do both, but remember that increasing the disk size up to 1 terabyte, for example, everything will be okay. Then from inside the guest system, you'll see that you have extra disk space and you can literally extend the system disk to the whole available partition with one command. But you won't be able to do the reverse. That is, you can reduce the size inside the guest system, but you won't be able to reduce the disk size. Keep this in mind. Add the disk if you want. This is how you can do it. The next field is a drop-down list. This is the storage policy. The default value is the virtual machine default policy, and if all disks have this policy value, then changing this value generally will cause all disks migrating to SSD. If this is set here, for example like this disk will always be on storage with a low policy, and changing the default VM policy won't affect it. The next is the controller type. In this case, we have LSI Logic SAS, which is universal controller at the moment. It is a very common controller supported by many operating systems. This is a para-virtualized controller type. Now, this type of controller will not bring more benefits to most systems, i.e., its potential usefulness is certain, but in reality only in some particular cases. It is definitely worth mentioning that installing this type of SATA controller or IDE is for very specific tasks. And then, everything is very simple. If you have one disk, you don't need to configure anything here except the size of the disk and the storage policy. Now, moving on the network card. There is only one network card in this case, and note that it is currently disabled. If you check this box, it will be on. Adapter type has the default setting. Any other settings are not recommended. Some sources recommend putting the network adapter type E1000. This is deprecated and shouldn't be done unnecessarily. Here you can select the network, but the thing is that you have a virtual machine deployed in the app, which is not yet connected to the network. You can choose the network you want from the list of the networks. Go to Mode. Here there are only a few modes, and these easiest ones, static address in manual mode, i.e. you'll be asked to enter the address. For example, 92.168.22 IP, and this will be applied to the adapter. So on this system, this will be given as a network adapter setting. Click will cause saving changes. If something goes wrong, the cloud director will display an error with a description. In this case, you will be able to contact Cloud for your tech support and will always be glad to assist you. Another option in static IP pool, what is it? For example, you have a local network inside your organization. When you select this setting, i.e. in the previous field network must be this network, you will automatically be assigned to this virtual machine. Some addresses not yet occupied in this network. This is similar to DHCP with the usage of static address, only a bit simpler. The third option is DHCP. A word of caution here, if you use this option, you will have to configure it at the edge gateway of your organization, which this particular network is connected to. And of course, after changing all settings when you enter static IP manual, you will need to put check mark. Otherwise, network card will not be connected to your VM. It will just be off. It is just similar to the fact that you have disabled the network card and the BIOS on the physical computer. Finally, we go to the guest OS customization section to discuss it in details. As I said, this virtual machine is deployed from a template. The template provides the same for all who use our cloud, and everyone has a question. What is the administrator password? Of course, making the same password for all users isn't secure. What should we do? First of all, there is a checkbox here, Enable Guest System Customization. What does this allow to do? In particular, if I check this box, this will allow me to change the password of the local administrator in the case of Windows operating systems, and the root user for Linux. Please note that the checkbox automatically generate password is checked automatically and it will indeed be generated automatically and will be displayed after starting the virtual machine with simultaneous customization in this field. If you don't want the password to be generated automatically, you can uncheck this box and fill in the password you want. In most cases, this shouldn't be a problem. We will show you later how to start customizing the guest system when we'll go over the switching on and off of the virtual machine. What else is possible? Here you can log in to the domain. If you have a domain deployed inside your virtual data center, you can automatically log the machine into the domain. In this case, Server 2019 is the guest system, and if I turn on and fill in these fields here, the machine will be entered into the domain. This checkbox is not recommended. This was originally a recommendation by Microsoft, but some time ago studies showed that on modern systems it is more detrimental than beneficial. Let's move on to the following section. Section Advanced. This block has appeared relatively recently. It wasn't previously presented in the interface of the vCloud Director. Here, as you can see, there is both CPU and memory in unlimited mode, i.e. there are no limits, but if you need, you can set the frequency limit of the processor and memory. If you are not sure, do not change anything in this block. There's already the maximum possible performance of the processor and memory. Metadata section. Here you can enter some metadata. What is for? The thing is that besides powering the machine on and off, you can also make a snapshot of its state. What's it for? For example, you want to install some updates on the gas system, but you're not sure if after the updates everything will work correctly. In this case, it is recommended to make a backup copy. The whole VM makes backup copies on a schedule, and you just need a quick check of the system. You take a snapshot of the VM, check what you need, and if all went well, you just delete the snapshot. If it fails, you just roll back to the previous state with a command. We'll show you how to do this later, but for now, I would like to explain why we're talking about snapshots in VM settings. The thing is, snapshot is not a backup, but in some cases, you still need to keep a snapshot for quite a long time. If you do not take any measures, it will grow in size. We do have a monitoring system which will inform us about that. If you don't take any measures, it will have an effect on total utilization of space, which you pay for, and on VM performance, because snapshot is stored in the same place as VM. So its uncontrolled growth will not have any positive effect on performance. You can, of course, look it up on our website. This is publicly available information for anyone who wants to see it. Here, we have everything arranged by category. If you go to the VMware Cloud, here is a lot of content, including how not to get a notification about snapshots. Let's go back to the settings window. We have the last block. This is monitoring, which allows you to see average disk load, write and read CPU usage, memory usage, and even switch. For example, now it's half an hour, and you can put it for the whole day. Right now it's empty because our VM hasn't turned on yet. We suggest now going directly to the power on. Here you see a great number of virtual machines. That's easy enough to find our VM by name, and then we're going to Action. Notice the unavailable actions are highlighted in gray. We can power on the VM, and the next item is to start the recustomization of the VM after powering on. In order to make this work, we can go into the settings again to the guest customization. Check this box, and after saving the configuration, we will show you what happens. Now, we're starting the recustomization process. We are warning right away. This process takes some time, including the time after starting the VM guest operating system. So it is recommended to wait not just to get ready, but also let it run for about 5 minutes. If you try to connect during this time, you can interrupt this setup and have to repeat the procedure again. Here it is connected, and without hesitation, we simply go into the settings and we'll see the local administrator password. This is the password you can use to log in to the guest operating system. Let's go back, find our VM, and consider the following steps. Now our guest operating system is on. What can we do with it? Of course, we can power it off. We can do it in two ways. Powering off like a physical computer from the power outlet. This is not the right thing to do because it might have some unsaved data on the guest operating system, and that might get lost. So, more correct way is shut down a guest OS. After that, you have everything correctly configured and installed the current VMware Tools version. Then you'll correctly shut down the guest OS, and after that, it correctly shuts down VM. In this case, you will need to command power off and make sure you do not have to do this again. If your guest OS, of course, supports all this. Windows 2016 and 2019 supports this. Suspend. This is suspending the VM in the state with running applications and tasks. If you choose this, you will literally freeze the guest OS and VM. At any time, I can restart it from the same state. Here we go. Now the description has changed and the machine is marked as suspended. Now, we just started by clicking on power on, and after a while it will restart again. But note that restoring takes some time. More than it, it would take just to power on and off the VM because it takes time to resume the state of the VM. Click Reset. In this case, this is similar to pressing the reset button and it will cause the VM to reboot. This completes the simple steps, but now moving on to more complicated stages. Installation of VM tools doesn't need a description. Insert media and eject media are the disabling the laser and floppy disks. Why are these features needed? The point is that if you have already inserted certain virtual images into VMware, then doing the same operation again will cause an error. You must first extract the previous one. It's all the same as with a physical computer. Create a snapshot. Before some important operation like installing an update, if you are not sure if everything can go well, make a snapshot. If something goes wrong, press reverse to snapshot, and the machine will return to the snapshot state. Move to copy. Here, you should remember that the VM is usually not just in a virtual data center, but wrapped in a kind of VApp. This is an entity you can see here. Let's switch. Here's our VApp, which has a VM inside of it. It's very easy to check. From this moment, we do exactly what we did a little bit before, switching it on and so on. If you click on the link, you will go into the properties of the VM. You can copy or move VM between the VApps with the commands copy to and move to. The only thing you don't need to do is try to copy and move with the VM powered on. You will get an error. You have a specific VM which you want to use. You just create a different VM which has another network connected to it and copy the VM you want to use just by changing your network adapter settings. Let's go back to the VM. Launch console. This will display the web console screen, which lets you access the web system. Do some presets and also allows you to manage your VM in case of emergency. For the daily work, This is not the most convenient option, so it is only necessary for the initial settings, then usually set up RDP for Windows or SSH for Linux machines. Nevertheless, you can use the web console at least for the initial setup. It is necessary. And then, when you have set up a more convenient way to connect to the VM, or more precisely to the guest operating system, you can do without it. And there are two virtual consoles. The first is the web console. It will open in a case you only need a browser. The second kind of console needs a software. You can download it from the VMware website, as console is used mostly in emergencies and for guest presets. Well, this is basically all we wanted to tell you in this part. All the best to you. See you later.